There has not been a financial shock felt round the world like this since the stock market crash of '08. The crisis that in no time rippled across the globe and forced the world to question how secure America truly was when it comes to money and leadership. To a lesser extent, but just as important, the same concerns now being leveled at the United Kingdom. Brexit has hit. The British are out of the European Union soon. And despite the fact most people wouldn't know Brexit from Weetabix, everybody has an opinion on why this is the best or the worst thing that could ever happen to Europe. And as in most cases, the truth and the facts are somewhere right between all the rhetoric. Rhetoric is the meat and potatoes of political campaigns. But the side dish this year in America is a heaping helping of brand and marketing, something that gathers up the bulk of at least one certain campaign. The only show on this network that honestly seeks answers by asking questions from both sides and allowing you to make the call. You dial us up and get in on the queue right now at 1-877-Newsmax. I'm Ed Berliner. This is The Hardline for Friday, June 24th, 2016.
Let June the 23rd go down in our history as our Independence Day.
Historic British vote has sent the global markets into a state of shock this morning.
Trying to figure out what the next political landscape could look like.
Well, you're seeing the British currency tank.
Global markets plunging.
The markets are already open. They're pretty much crashing.
The EU's failing. The EU's dying. This is the first step towards a Europe of sovereign nation states.
Leaving the EU won't make any of our problems any easier to solve and may make them far harder.
British Prime Minister David Cameron announces he will step down.
I think the country requires fresh leadership. This is not a decision I've taken lightly.
Is this the beginning of the end of the EU?
We're risk that we will lose another country.
I think what we have to do here is not business as usual.
We are ready to face the ripple effects.
Even though the majority of us voted to leave, we are actually regretting it.
It's a victory against the big merchant banks, against the big businesses, and against big politics.
There are still those who look at America as something of an isolationist, believing that no matter the issue, we are more sheltered from effects of issues and serious discourse than most nations mostly because we're America, and we're over here while everything else is over there. Of course, those would be the people who have not paid attention to the globalization of nations and dictates over the last 10 to 20 years. No matter how you slice it, we're connected to everything of import that happens everywhere on this planet. And at this moment, that means when one nation, one very powerful nation, and in some considerations, the number one ally we have, makes a decision to, in effect, shut down their participation in a union of countries and states that will tear into the economic, social, and certainly safety facets of our lives here in America, we need to pay close attention, understand why one vote is at this moment changing the world. Your phone calls will add to and perhaps even change this discussion. Get into the queue right now at 1-877-Newsmax, 1-877-639-7629. Be prepared to take part. The man most qualified to talk on all facets of Brexit joins us in studio, former Conservative Member of Parliament, now Senior Market Strategist for Euro-Pacific Capital. Let's welcome John Browne back to the Hardline. John, always a pleasure to talk to you. I know that we've talked about this before.
Good to see you, Ed.
We've talked about this on edge here and there for the last couple of months. Now we are finally here. The words that we heard in that opening segment are some people believing that this is the beginning of the end for the European Union, and some say this is the beginning of the end for the United Kingdom. Put it all down in fact for us. Tell us where it really lies.
Well, there are two avenues open to Europe. One is that it might break up. It might. And the other is it'll get to ever closer union, and that those countries that want to stay will be much closer. They won't be like a United States of Europe. They will be one country without states. It will be broken into regions and a much tighter union, probably under German control, and probably quite powerful being under German control.
How much does that scare people? Let me stop you there. When you say being under German control, because I've already read and heard a number of people say they chafe at that, and they say that that is going to make a bigger mess than we're in now.
Well, it certainly scares the British and people like me. I look at gravestones in England of 2 world wars, and I do not want to be. I want to be friends of the Germans, but not under the Germans. And we have a slightly different outlook on life. And that is worrying to me. Now, as far as Britain is concerned, I think Britain will flourish under free enterprise. I can hear in my bones Winston Churchill and Margaret Thatcher cheering in their graves at yesterday's decision, because it was the last peaceful opportunity for Britain to leave the European Union. And it means Britain is free. And just like Margaret Thatcher and Winston Churchill before her, they're key to their policy, just like Reagan, President Reagan. The key element was freedom. Freedom from the abuse of trade unions, freedom from abusive taxes, freedom from oppressive enemies. But that freedom doesn't happen in a socialist country like Europe at the moment.
But let me stop you there for a moment, too, because you talk about history with Winston Churchill and Margaret Thatcher. There are many people who say that that is old thinking, that here in the 21st century, and this is what some of the critics say, that in a globalized society, you've got to be more together. You have to create those opportunities for people to cross borders. To not do it is destroying what could be the next fabric of life.
Well, you know, I entertained my old golfing buddy in the Lords and Commons golfing team, Dennis Thatcher, to lunch at my club in London, and he asked me exactly the same question as you just posed. And I said, well, surely we can just be like Switzerland or Norway or tiny little Singapore, almost just a city, and by our own guts and gumption and freedom be highly successful. He half rose out of the table and he hit the table, bang, and all the glasses went up. The whole club looked round. He said, that's exactly what Margaret thinks.
All right, let's go ahead and hear from some of the individuals involved here. First of all, the British Prime Minister, David Cameron, immediately came out and, to the shock of some people, said that he was going to announce his resignation. Here's what he said.
The British people have made a very clear decision to take a different path. And as such, I think the country requires fresh leadership to take it in this direction. This is not a decision I've taken lightly. But I do believe it's in the national interest to have a period of stability and then the new leadership required.
Is it simply stated that he's a defeated man, that he had to go? Did he have to go this fast, this quickly?
I think he did the absolutely honourable thing, because the people in the European Union pressing for an instant switching off of the light. And what we've got to do in Britain is to transfer the leadership, which takes time. The Conservative Party have to elect their leader and everything. There's the party conference season and everything. And we want to make sure that these negotiations, which some could be quite difficult, like what do you do with EU citizens that are living in Britain, those are quite difficult decisions to make, much less than freeing our fishing zones back, giving us those back. And it takes time to go through these complex things, and we want to have a proper job done. And we want to be outside the rule of the European Union, but trading with the European Union and its states.
But can you do that now with the European Union breaking up and the UK leaving the EU? People say that's going to be nearly impossible.
Well, under the World Trade Organization, of which we're all members, they're forbidden from discriminatory trade. So it's no use some vengeance people like the Italian Prime Minister today wanting us really hurt, saying, oh, you can't trade with us. That's against World Trade Organization rules, WTO trade rules. And so Germany, which has its second biggest car market in Britain, do you think it wants to stop selling 8.5 million cars a year, high-end cars? It doesn't. Germany wants to trade just as much as Britain.
Let me get to Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister, talking about not only the decision, but how it affects Britain's ability to solve the problems that they face. Let's talk about those problems, and I have a question for you on the side. Here's what he said.
These insurgent movements of left and right, populist movements have come together. They've created now what is this enormous decision for the UK. And we've got to, in the centre ground, centre left or centre right, be prepared to go and rethink our politics and find the answers to the problems that the world is posing at the moment, because I personally believe that leaving the EU won't make any of our problems any easier to solve and may make them far harder.
I'm going to guess that you disagree with what he said.
Well, I was in the House with him. I do disagree on taking such a bearish view. Why should freedom and enterprise make things more difficult? It'll make it easier for the British. We'll have one voice instead of 1 over 28. One of 28 voices we have in the European Union, and it's going to expand to even more. So we have at least our own voice over and our control over our own affairs in the country. And I think that's a far better way to go. We did brilliantly under Margaret Thatcher. She stripped all Blair's policies of socialism away, and she freed us. And there was an explosion of enterprise in Britain under Margaret Thatcher. Explosion.
Two things come up here in light of what Tony Blair just said. Already today, I'm reading and hearing a lot of reports from the United Kingdom, people saying that I really didn't know what I was voting for, and gee, if I had it to do again, I would vote entirely differently. I would vote to stay. As a matter of fact, Google searches went through the roof last night and today from people searching out the European Union, what it is. People are saying they had no idea what they were voting for, John. And the second part of that question is, if you look at the numbers of people who voted age-wise, you will see that it's unreal to look at how the youth of the country voted to stay in the European Union. 64% 18 to 24, yet it was mostly the 65 plus that said leave. Okay, take those two things. People who regret already and say that they didn't know what they were voting for, and it being mostly the older population, and tell us why those two things are important.
Well, you obviously get always some nanas who come along and they place this thing and say, oh my God, I made a mistake. I should have voted the other way the day after. I mean, it makes a great story. But the much more serious thing is your second question, which is the predominance of youth vote for staying in. That is precisely because the European Union, in its insidious tentacle way, got into all the British schools. Even when I was a member of Parliament, they were all preaching everything's good about the European Union, and a lot of the teaching profession is from the left. Oh yes, the European Union's great, it's socialist, and that's the way to teach. And I'm not at all surprised to see that the youth voted heavily for the European Union. They've been indoctrinated, and that's the price of it. And that's why I say yesterday was the last peaceful opportunity for Britain to leave.
We're going to talk about this more right after the break, but very quickly, 30, 40 seconds. The stock market fell over 600 points today in America, blew out every single gain of 2016. Shouldn't we be worried about that? John, that's bad for America.
This is a big change, as you said in your introduction. A major, fourth largest economy in the world pulling out. Big thing, and so many people had bet huge amounts, believing Cameron and all the polls and the bookies. They backed it, not only with their personal wages, which were huge, but with their shares and money of other people. Now they've got to pull it back, and of course, when you make a loss, your margin call comes. You have to sell something more to meet the margin call. So there's a lot of unwinding of highly speculative positions that got caught out wrong.
So we really shouldn't be that worried, because people say, well, okay.
Short term, there's bound to be volatility. But in the longer term, I think it will sort itself out. Of course, one has to say we're on the edge of a recession, and we're on the cusp of a debt crisis and a fiat currency crisis.
Okay, I'm going to talk about more after we come back, because John Browne will stay with us after the break. We zero in on the changing politicians in the UK and how fear helped to drive this as well, fear that very well may be justified. Stay with us on The Hard Line.